Hello, ghouls and gals. I know most of you will know me for all my fantasy content, but from the recent spree of videos, I'm sure you can tell I'm quite well versed when it comes to my fictional universes. I won't pretend to know 40k as well as your Lutons, or your Arbiter Ians, or your Major Kills, but I actually got into Warhammer through the grimdark far future rather than the equally grimdark fantasy. The expansive 40k universe is full of stories, and while the main story might never progress so long as there are models selling well, the events leading up to the Emperor being interred on the Golden Throne and the Imperium becoming the shell of its former glory are still fascinating. Over 50 novels and countless lore videos have explored the Horus Heresy. There's a tabletop game, and yet, after seeing Space Marine 2, the only thing I could think was how successful a Warhammer 30k Space Marine game could be. An adaptation of the novels, if you will, that gives us a visual experience like no other, showing humanity's darkest hour and the fall of the favourite son. There are plenty of other ways you could explore the Horus Heresy in a video game. I had a lovely commenter say they wanted to see a Horus Heresy Total War, which could be super fun, but I think for the narrative weight of the Heresy, we'd need something like Space Marine. I'm not here to argue the Horus Heresy is the best Warhammer story ever told, but it is by far the grandest. Huge battles, larger-than-life characters, and a story that's full of twists, turns, and defining moments. It's Shakespearean stuff, even if it doesn't always have a tremendous level of depth, or if we end up with some weaker elements in the novels. While it's hard to argue that the graphics, say, be used in Space Marine 2 wouldn't make for a gorgeously gory Horus Heresy game, I'm not here to say I want to see a video game adaptation of the Heresy just because I think it would look pretty. I think this game is a step in the right direction for Warhammer, as it would really give people who are new to the setting thanks to Space Marine 2 a chance to dive into one of the most important events in the Imperium's history. Of course, I know there's also the big Warhammer TV show hopefully coming soon, and while Amazon could go balls to the wall and spend millions upon billions of dollars on all the effects, costumes and more you'd need to bring the Horus Heresy to life, I doubt that'll happen. Something on a smaller scale will probably be a better starting point to see if general audiences actually want to see a show set in such a dark and miserable universe. I want to see the Heresy adapted. I think we all do, but after seeing Space Marine 2, I think the safer bet would be on a video game. So, what does this game look like? Well, pretty, for one. I know I just mentioned the graphics and said I wanted this game for more than it just looking pretty, but can you imagine it? Isstvan 3 turned to rubble by explosion so massive you can feel your walls shaking, the great triumph at Ullanor, and the assembly of the Primarchs there. The Imperium was at its height during this era, and I think the best way you're going to show that is through graphics that games are now capable of. When the combat around you looks more visceral, when you can see the humanity or lack thereof in the faces of the Marines next to you, it allows you to get more immersed in the overall experience. Also, it's probably the best way to render characters that would otherwise be impossible to make look normal or cool. Like, a practical Magnus has a very high risk of looking incredibly cringe. As I said though, we're not just talking about the look here. The Horus Heresy is packed with characters and a long enough story to last more than one game. Yeah, in my vision for this, we're not going from Ullanor to the Siege of Terra in a single game. Not unless we're getting some mental 100 plus hour narrative experience. No, I believe the first game, or at least the start, should focus entirely on the story leading up to and including Isstvan 3. We'll get to see the fallen Primarchs in their prime, alongside the best of their legions. We'll get to know who the Emperor is from afar, keeping the mysticism of the character alive while making him a formidable foe, and making sure that when he does show up, it really matters. Of course, most Warhammer fans will know the story, but for those that don't, by giving them the time to get to know Horus, Abaddon, Mortarion, Fulgrim, and more, will make their falls feel that much more like a blow. I don't want this game to just take place in the middle of the conflict, as I believe then it'll just be like Space Marine or its sequel, nothing but action thrown at your eyes. Sure, you could get attached to some of the loyalists, but it's going to be much more impactful if you know why the heretics are being called traitors and what it means for the Space Marines to feel that betrayal. The story of Space Marine 2 is good, I think. It has some great moments and really gives you the glorious feeling of being an Ultramarine, but it falls short with its villains. I don't think anyone is going to remember the name Imura, because we don't really have a reason to despise him except for him being bad. His overarching goal is just to be evil, and while Warhammer 40k is much better than that when it comes to giving Chaos Marines motivation, the Horus Heresy actually shows why the legions were willing to ditch the Emperor, even before they threw their entire lot in with the weird Chaos God powers. There are genuine reasons to doubt the Emperor and the Imperium without just resorting to these Chaos Gods gave me magic blue fire powers. Even if in the novels a lot of character downfalls just feel stupid, this adaptation is a time to rectify that. Show the Emperor as a bad dad, make Horus lose faith in him earlier. If it must be done to make turning away from the Big E more believable, let it happen. Then, when you see brothers of the same Marine chapter fighting, it's going to hit that much more on an emotional level, because these will be people that you were once allies with, rather than enemies who look a bit like you and call your Emperor a corpse. With the scope and scale of the Horus Heresy, it might make me sound like a bit of a madman to say I want to see it adapted at all. It took more than 50 books to cover it all, more text than perhaps any fictional event ever, and yet when you break it down, not all of those books are necessary. Not every plot line leads to terror, and while it's interesting to know what happens to some of the lesser known legions and characters, there are already more than enough players in the Heresy you get to see in the plot of the main books. Also, once again, it would help build the sheer scale of the Imperium's influence if you have to find out about other major events across the universe via data slates or one-off lines from other characters. So, with all the characters in the Horus Heresy, including literal demigods, who do we choose to be the protagonist of the whole thing? Well, that's a tough question. We won't be playing as a Primarch, I can tell you that much. To save the image of them being these godlike beings, the player shouldn't be the one controlling them. A Primarch shouldn't be the person affected by a difficulty slider. Also, they're such inhuman characters that it might be difficult for players to resonate with them. They all look cool in their own ways, but they have the lacking emotions of a Space Marine times 1,000, unless we're talking Vulcan or Angron or maybe Russ, but none of those figures are central enough to feel like they're worth playing, and their emotions usually limited to one thing or another, like Angron's rage, for example. You could make a better case for Guilliman, or Dawn, or Sanguinius, or even Horus himself, but I still see the same problem in giving the player control over a character that in the lore is simply too powerful. It's hard to feel like a world is crumbling around you when you already know your character is a world beater on their own. Titus and Malam Kaido already border on the OP by themselves, so imagine the feats we'd have to accomplish to make a Primarch feel realised. It's better to keep them in the background, but still have them as characters players speak to, in order to establish that father and son relationship they have with their Marines. And so, we need someone close to a Primarch. This could be done in one of two ways. Either, as Relic did with Titus, we introduce a Marine through the game that just so happens to have a close relationship with one of the Primarchs, or we go for someone established in the novels. In a perfect, overly ambitious world, I'd choose the former option with ease. I'd say you, as a player, could decide what legion you belong to, and play entirely different campaigns based on what front you are positioned in. But, instead, I think we have to put an unnamed Marine with the Lunar Wolves if we're going down this route. Perhaps they're a close advisor to a member of the Mournival, or a Marine who makes a name for themselves within a company. Either way, being near Horus means being at the core of this story, and it would also mean that when the time comes, the player can decide whether they'll join the Heresy or fight for the Imperium. We can't very well have this game make that decision for you, especially if you're making your own character, or at least not show what happens on the other side, in the same way that the novels don't just stick with the Imperium's point of view. So there's that option, which works pretty well, or we could follow the example of the novels and place Garviel Loken as our primary protagonist. Call it lazy, call it understandable. I think Loken is the protagonist of the first 3 books of the Horus Heresy for a reason. He's a true servant of the Imperium, but he doesn't serve simply out of blind loyalty. His mettle can be tested, as it was in 6319, and at some points his faith falters, especially in his Primarch. At the start of the story though, Loken loves Horus. Even if he doesn't look like Horus, as so many Lunar Wolves do, he still sees the Primarch as a father. He is a son of Horus, and that dedication comes only from a pre-established character. Also, I think the introduction of the Heresy through Loken gives us a great foundation for a video game. We have Torgadon, who acts as our friend and ally. Loken also has a great relationship with some of the regular humans aboard Horus' ship too, so we can see how revered Space Marines are and further establish the godlike status of the Primarchs. In this version, I don't think we would ever give the player the decision to join the heretical forces. Horus didn't even try and convert Loken because he knew that the Marine simply wouldn't turn his back on the Emperor. And so we would then need to have someone from the Chaos side enter the picture. And I think there are a few great candidates here, but for the first game, the one following Horus' fall and attack on Isstvan III, there's no better candidate than Lucius. A loyalist, purely out of spite, Lucius could be played in POV segments in between fighting as Loken, allowing us to get to know the Emperor's children as well. We'd interact with Tarvitz, see Rylanor in his glory, and all the while appear to be a loyal servant of the Emperor, even if we are a snarky one. Then, as you go to defend the loyalist outpost in Isstvan III, suddenly your objective changes. Instead of having you kill traitors as you have been doing all this time, you speak with Eidolon over Vox, and your objective suddenly changes to kill the Loyalists. Gasp! What a twist! And a moment that'll have players hating every second as they're forced to bring down the last gasp of hope for the Loyalists on Isstvan 3. I think we could also switch to other points of view throughout the course of this lengthy campaign. Having a mission as Nathaniel Garrow when you escape on the Eisenstein would be cool, for example, as it could be a bit like when Joker has to save the Normandy in Mass Effect 2, as Garrow's injury would make him a bit useless in combat. So, in this first game, which would set up the Heresy, showing Horus's fall and all the events leading up to it, you'd be mainly playing as Loken, but with the odd chapter for Lucius and Garrow thrown in, similar to the Mortal Kombat campaigns if you've ever played one of those, but with a lot less jumping between perspectives. We'd see the Primarchs in all their splendour, at the height of their powers and importance, only to then watch as the War Master decides to turn his back on his father. I think that we would need to improve the scene that sees Horus lose faith in the Emperor, make it feel less like Chaos just intervene and showed him things that make him go all heretical, and instead follow the path of Horus growing annoyed that he's the one taking on all of the War Master responsibilities while his father sits at home in terror doing nothing. Of course, we know Chaos is working behind the scenes, but if Horus's faith isn't shaky to begin with, it might feel like too big of a leap. Largely, the game will be like Space Marine 2, third-person perspective, a focus on ranged and melee combat, but where we'll really see the benefit is in these big-budget cutscenes. Using Horus's ship like a battle barge, we'll have a central location for the story to watch as Loken's own pride for serving the Lunar Wolves turns to ash. A similar story would be found with Garrow, who also didn't join any of the lodges within his legion, serving as a loyal marine to the Emperor. I think it's important to have both Garrow and Loken be playable, as I think the flight of the Eisenstein would be a great cut-off point for this first game. It's the only way that you get a somewhat positive ending out of the massacre at Isstvan 3, showing Rogel Dawn picking up Garrow's message and being able to prepare for the Heresy. I've not gone for a full book rip-off, as I wouldn't have Tarvitz get POV moments, mostly because I think he, Loken and Garrow are simply too similar. Lucius truly would offer something different, and not just because he falls to chaos. Lucius is arrogant, childish, and shows the worst of the Emperor's children, which is why we need to see things from his perspective. Show the jealousy he experiences, but never make him a sympathetic character. Also, later on with Lucius, it'll mean we'll get to meet the Thousand Sons and Ahriman, who I was going to have as a POV character in this imaginary game, but decided against it so as not to show too many areas of the galaxy. What do you think? Would a Horus Heresy game like that work out, or do you just want to see more of Titus and the modern era of Warhammer 40,000? Let me know what you change, what you like, and anything else you want to tell me down in the comments, and I'll see you soon, ghouls and gals.